Rumours of Corbyn's leadership on the rocks. North Korea conducts another missile test fire. And just how popular is the no-confidence motion against John Bercow? Welcome to Tip TV Politics. On the show this week, Emil Dall from the defence and security think tank RUSI talks us through the latest news from North Korea. And on the sofa to discuss the week's developments, Payne from Business Insider UK and Gavin Haynes from Vice News. Now let's start with the news of John Bercow. It's fair to say it's not been the most relaxing couple of weeks for the Speaker. First, he was criticised for his comments relating to President Trump's state visit later this year, but now Mr Bercow has been landed in fresh controversy. A video has emerged of him telling students at Reading University about his support for Remain in the European Union referendum. All of this has prompted Tory MP James Duttridge to table a motion of no confidence against the Speaker, as he claims Mr Bercow is no longer politically impartial, but rather is courting controversy. So Adam, just how much support is there amongst MPs for this vote of no confidence against John Bercow?
Well, I think it's more serious than the last time there was an effort to get rid of him. Last time in 2015, there was a move by Hague and Gove to try and change the rules to make it easy to get rid of Bercow. I think this time it's a bit more serious. I think John Bercow has made a mistake. The rules of his office say that he must be impartial. And I think he'll be first to admit he's made a mistake. But this move against him at the moment, we've had 4 or 5 MPs come out publicly, people like Nadine Dorries, John Whittingdale. But I'm still not convinced there is a big enough critical mass in order to vote this motion of no confidence. I think John Bercow will survive. I think he'll probably reinstate his pledge to step down kind of quietly 2018, 2020. But I also don't think it's in the government's interest to have this kind of political war in the House of Commons when Brexit's happening. Article 50 talks are on the way. So although I think what John Bercow did was silly, it was a mistake, I think he'll survive.
Gavin, as Adam just said there, he has done something silly. Is this telling off, or rather a more quite severe one, vote of no confidence? Is this kind of deserved?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, he's been a very naughty boy. He's been grandstanding John Bercow, looking for his place in history, looking to be bigger than the house that he seeks to represent in some sense. And the great irony of this is that there was never actually any moves underway for the government, the executive, to have this speech of Trump in addressing both houses. So basically, he decided to quash something which didn't exist, simply in order to hear the sounds of his own voice, which he seems to enjoy so very much.
What was his reason for doing? Do you think it was purely the sake of his ego, effectively, and wanting to be, I think the Spectator put it at the time, grandstanding and giving himself a personal popularity boost?
Yes, I think he wanted to be a champion of a certain kind of mood within our times. And unfortunately, we are in a historical moment where everyone thinks they are Morgan Freeman, and they all think that they are speaking, they're all quoting Pastor Niemöller, first they came for X and then Y. And he is just giving vent to something where people feel that politics no longer applies. It's not simply that, well, you're of the left, I'm of the right, we have different views. It's now become a matter of sort of transcendent Mandela-like morality to speak out against Trump. And that's just very bad news for politics on the whole. I
mean, Adam, how much of this is personal in the sense of, as you said, he has faced threats to his position before. The Conservatives in particular, he has riled a lot of members of Parliament, particularly on the Conservative Party, up over the years, hasn't he?
Yes, I mean, I don't think you can approach this Bercow story without putting it into some long-standing context. I mean, John Bercow is not the most popular figure with Tory backbenchers. He used to be kind of on the right of the party, the Monday Club, and now he's kind of lurched off into the left and, as you say, become also one of the more liberal figures in Parliament. But I think what really gave more fuel, more petrol to this no confidence motion was him saying to Reading University that he backed Remain. And personally, although I admit that is an error, it was silly, it was a bad judgment, there's been no suggestions or indications or complaints that that's shone through in how he's chaired debate. As far as I'm aware, there's been no debate that he's been pro-Brexit or pro-Remain or hostile towards Brexit. So I think storm in a teacup kind of is the phrase I'd use at the moment. He has been a silly boy. He's been a very silly boy, but I don't think it's in Parliament or government's interest to turn this into a soap opera with, which will dominate national headlines. So I think it will remain a storm in a teacup.
OK, well, we'll leave that there. We'll go into the second story of the week. Obviously, with Parliament in recess, there's less happening in Westminster, but something that has been rumbling on, as well as the Bercow story, is Corbyn's leadership. There was a Comres poll for the Sunday Mirror and independent newspapers saw Labour trailing the Conservatives on voting intention by 26 to 41%, so a large margin there. And we also learnt that the Labour Party has been vetting potential leadership successors, such as Angela Rayner and Rebecca Long-Bailey. I mean, Gavin, how significant is this vetting potential leadership successors? Is it fairly commonplace in parties to be doing this?
I think it's entirely inconsequential because nothing is going to happen for a start. And secondly, I quite believe Tom Watson's explanation that they were just vetting various shadow cabinet ministers to see who plays well, particularly in the north of England, where I think they acknowledge they now have a problem. It's just everything is sort of rumbling on and on. We've got 2 by-elections coming up. They're probably going to go very, very badly for Mr. Corbyn, but there is no longer a mechanism, a move to replace him. So it's just going to be sort of bad news bears for Corbyn into the middle distance.
Adam, in terms of who would be a success, obviously we had Owen Smith's disastrous attempt to try and topple Corbyn, but is there really anyone who has any appetite to be replacing Corbyn as leader at the moment?
Well,
Clive Lewis has said he won't, or he said something a little bit cruder, but basically said it's nonsense. Angela Rayner and Rebecca Long-Bailey don't seem to be putting out much.
Well, I mean, the popular name is Clive Lewis. He's seen as someone who can bridge the gap between the party centre and the party left. Rebecca Long-Bailey, as you say, is popular with McDonnell and Team Corbyn, and Angela Rayner as well. But rather than kind of picking and choosing names, I think the main point I'd make is the problem of the Labour leadership is a surface problem. Labour's biggest problems predate Corbyn and go much deeper. Labour's biggest problems are the collapse of Scotland. How's it going to win Scotland back? What does it have to say to Scotland? And secondly, the Labour vote is split into 2. On one hand, you've got middle class, broadly speaking, of course, middle class progressives in London who support Corbyn. On the other hand, you've got traditional working class Labour support in places like Copeland, places like Stoke, places like Barrow, where I'm from originally, in the northern heartlands. And the gulf between these chunks of Labour support is so massive now that whoever takes over from Corbyn, or whether it be Corbyn himself, it could be Clive Lewis, Angela Rayner, whoever, that is such a big gulf to bridge, and I don't know how they bridge it. So for me, the Labour leadership, there could be a movement if the by-elections go really bad, but whoever takes over, there's still a monumental, deep-lying problem there that I don't think a change of leadership can really address.
And we had John Proctor on the programme a couple of weeks ago who led this Labour against Brexit movement, which got a lot of support at the time, and I think it still does have a lot of support. And he mentioned that Corbyn is losing his grassroots support, the support that got him where he was, over Article 50 and his 3-line whip. I mean, Gavin, how damaging has this Article 50 debate been for Corbyn? Or, is he being pulled away from his grassroots support?
I think he is, simply because those people are idealists through and through, and anytime you go against them, you split yourself off from their tribe, and they're always seeking, it's almost sort of like a religiosity to it, where they're always looking for the pure of heart, and he's had to make the compromises of power that, he's been schooled in after X number of years of constantly rebelling, and that has played badly for him. And subsequently, sort of concomitantly to that, he's looked very weak in terms of what he's done to censure the MPs who rebelled against him.
I mean, Adam, then what could he do? Is there anything he can now do? Because obviously Article 50 is such a massive political event. Is there anything he could do to try and re-foster that grassroots support that he once had in such large numbers?
No. I think that Labour's big problem here is it can only respond to what government's doing, and government isn't really revealing that much. But, Labour didn't secure any amendments. The Lords are going to pass this bill. Corbyn, I guess the easy answer is push for a soft Brexit, but how can Corbyn really do that? What sort of leverage has he got? You're right, he has lost the support of lots of staunch, passionate Europhiles in his own support, and there's people close to him as well that are starting to not be as passionate about his leadership. So I really struggle to envisage a situation where Jeremy Corbyn can retain those supporters.
Okay, and then just very quickly, in terms of by-election results, Gavin, what's your feeling?
Do you want me to put my neck on the stump then? I think they will definitely lose the Stoke by-election to UKIP. Copeland's a bit more of a toss-up.
Yep. Adam?
Well, I think that out of the two, the seat which I think is most under threat for Labour is Copeland. I think it'll hold on to Stoke.
Now, on Sunday morning, North Korea conducted a ballistic missile launch at one of its air bases near the west coast of the country. But this is not out the ordinary. In the past 13 months alone, North Korea has launched over 20 ballistic missiles. But what does this all really mean? To look in focus, I spoke to Emil Dall, Research Fellow in Proliferation and Nuclear Policy at the Royal United Services Institute. Emil Dall, what does this missile launch show in terms of the capabilities of North Korea now?
So North Korea has tested and really stepped up its activity over the last year. It has conducted 2 nuclear tests and 20 missile launches in the past year alone. And on the surface, this test wasn't out of that pattern too much. But it's now emerged that North Korea has indeed made quite a lot of a technological leap in terms of its missile capability. We found out that the missile is loaded with solid fuel rather than liquid fuel, and that has implications for how quickly they can prepare a launch. With liquid fuel, there's a lot more preparations involved, and it's a lot easier to detect, for the international community to detect whether North Korea is about to launch a missile. With solid fuel, that becomes a lot more difficult.
Does it do anything in terms of the range of the missiles, their range in terms of how far they can go and what they can hit?
So we don't know much about the range. It only flew about 300 miles into the Sea of Japan. North Korea has long said it wanted to develop a long-range missile, intercontinental missile capability capable of reaching the US West Coast and directly threaten the US mainland, which would absolutely change the sort of calculus of the United States. We do not yet see that capability, and we believe it was more of an intermediate range missile, but the intention is there, and it's only a matter of time before they progress further, is sort of the conclusion to draw from this.
In terms of the rate of progress then, does this missile launch show anything about the trajectory they're heading and how quickly they're heading there?
I think it shows something about the intention. There's still a few limiting factors, of course, and you can't assume that it will necessarily be a straight forward approach and a continuation of past developments. But I definitely think it shows a lot about the trajectory towards an intercontinental ballistic missile capability.
And in terms of what's next then for North Korea, if they want to, as they have clearly said, accelerate these programs and make them more complex, what would be the next thing they will be looking to do after this missile launch?
It's a really good question, because for me, at least, I think North Korea is already at the top of the threat agenda, at least not just in East Asia, but now also for the rest of the world. It's difficult to think of what the sort of next step is for North Korea when they're already at the top of the threat agenda internationally. If they were to demonstrate a long-range ICBM capability, that would be the next step. But how do you demonstrate that without causing a sort of a fierce response from the United States?
Well, let's talk then about the response we've had from the international community first. But in terms of rhetoric and their ambition and what they've been saying, what do we know about the motives North Korea have for possessing these weapons?
Well, North Korea sees it as their sort of one tool, last resort for regime survival. The Kim regime is obsessed with staying in power and maintaining the North Korean state as it looks today. The way they can do that, if you look at it from North Korea's side, they're surrounded by US allies who are protected under the US nuclear umbrella, what we call extended deterrence. They find themselves quite insecure, and they want to maintain their state as it looks today. A nuclear capability would deter, is the theory at least, would deter the United States from attacking the state.
And in terms of the United States then, Donald Trump, or President Trump we should say, this is his first big dealing with North Korea, and it's quite a significant one. What has been the response in your opinion?
So I think you're absolutely right. And it was the first big test for President Trump. He was with Prime Minister Abe at the time at his golf resort in Florida, and I think the response was a little bit quickly drawn up as a result of that. He sort of stated one line in reaffirming the U.S. commitment to Japan, but what the statement didn't contain was the sort of normal rhetoric about what are we going to do to counter this? What's the U.S. response going to be? So we don't know very much about what Trump's next step is going to be.
What would a traditional response look like to something like this from previous American presidents?
It would look more like a renewed commitment to sanctions. It would look like a warning to North Korea that if they go any further, there would be a retaliatory response of some sort, whether that's military or sanctions related. And it would also have included South Korea, which was left out of this statement in particular.
In terms of regional implications, particularly China, what's been the Chinese response to this, and how might this missile launch impact on the regional politics in play at the moment?
So China's been put in a bit of a tricky situation in terms, it's definitely been put in the spotlight again, and it's always put in the spotlight whenever North Korea provokes and carries out a provocation like this. Interestingly, the Chinese Foreign Ministry came out and said that it was up to South Korea and the United States to sort this mess out, which is an interesting response because it's also putting the sort of action on Donald Trump and saying that it's really up to him to sort out this situation. China is concerned about the North Korean nuclear capability, but what we don't know is are they more concerned about North Korean nuclear capability or the United States' possible response to such capability. So they're walking this fine line where they want to keep North Korea intact. They do not want a united Korea with a United States right on its border. It likes a stable North Korea because there's significant trade relations with the northern provinces in China. And they don't want the overspill and the potential overspill of a North Korean conflict should that happen.
So what do they see then as the worst case scenario in terms of an American response? What is their real fear in terms of practical response from the American president?
I think they would be very, very concerned should the United States choose to respond militarily to a North Korean threat, because that would trigger a North Korean response in return, and could potentially lead to the breaking out of war again on the Korean Peninsula, which is something China is very much not interested in.
Just in terms of an international response, the collective international response, the UN Security Council strongly condemned the launch by North Korea later on Monday. But North Korea has repeatedly flouted the Security Council resolutions in terms of putting an end to its nuclear and ballistic missile activities. What practically can the international community really do about stopping North Korea's program?
So it's been issuing sanctions against North Korea since 2006, I believe. And those sanctions haven't really stopped North Korea in its ambitions to acquire a advanced nuclear capability. What they have done is slowing down the North Korean regime, complicated the processes, but North Korea has been very skilled in finding loopholes or pathways through illicit overseas networks in order to acquire the capabilities and technologies and materials that they need to develop their nuclear and missile capabilities. We've now got to a point where North Korea is able to manufacture many of these things within the country. So it's difficult to see what further sanctions can be put against nuclear and missile activity specifically. So then we move into harsher sanctions against North Korea as a country. We're talking about limiting coal exports from North Korea, which we've done before. And the vital partner there is China, who remains the biggest trading partner with North Korea. if China is not fully on board, there's not much that can be done. I believe China can be brought in, but China also has a number of other concerns, which is US presence in the region, and specifically they've been very concerned about the deployment of a new anti-ballistic missile defense system to South Korea by the United States.
Okay. Emil Dall, Research Fellow for the Proliferation and Nuclear Policy at the Royal United Services Institute. Thank you very much for coming on the programme.
Thank you.
Now, on Thursday, we will know whether a rail deal reached by Southern Rail and the union ASLEF has been successful in bringing an end to strike action. About 930 ASLEF members will vote in the poll on whether to accept the deal, but it remains uncertain what the result will be. Joining us now is Matthew Warren, Deputy Editor of The Conversation UK, who is a commuter on Southern. Matt, welcome to the show. Just give us an idea of what it's been like the past few months, being a commuter on Southern Rail.
It's more or less been the last year. It's been absolutely risible, mainly because I'm not sure Southern has any idea what's going on and which trains are going to run and which aren't. And so the main problem has been not the reduced timetable, but the fact that even those trains that are supposed to be running are cancelled short notice, supposedly because staff haven't turned up to work. So while I was going into London 4 days a week a year ago, I now only go in 2 days a week, and that's as a direct result of the strike.
And Matt, just give us an idea in terms of what the sympathy is in terms of your fellow commuters about what the strikes are about and what the unions in particular are fighting for.
I think initially there was some sympathy for those who were on strike. I think everyone deserves good working conditions, and I'm sure their grievances were genuine. But I think the problem has been compounded by the fact that it's gone on for so long, and I think sympathy for any of the parties is now wearing pretty thin.
And so are you then hoping for, in terms of what's happening on Thursday with the vote on the new negotiated deal, you're hoping for a agreement from the ASLEF members that this is going to be the end of these strike actions?
I'm absolutely hoping for that, partly because I hope they've now been presented with a deal that they're happy with, but also that we can finally move on and get hundreds of thousands of people into London and out of London in a reasonable way every day. My situation has been just about tolerable, but looking at some of the commuters, there's an air of desperation about some people.
And what's been your view on, for instance, the government and the Department of Transport in particular in their handling of how these negotiations have come about and the way they've been conducted and the tensions between the parties involved?
My overwhelming sense is that the government has either failed to act or just appears utterly impotent on this issue. I'm not sure they really have a solution, and I'm not sure there's any way for them to sort it out. Certainly it doesn't look like there is, and I, like thousands of other commuters, feel like that we're just being ignored.
Okay, Matt Warren, Deputy Editor of The Conversation UK and commuter on Southern Rail. Thank you very much for coming on the programme.
Thank you.
Adam, politically, what do you see as the impact of these strikes and the fact they've been so drawn out and they've caused such, as Matt outlined, such delays and complications for so many people?
I think at first, as Matt pointed out, the sympathy was in favour of the people who were striking, but as I say, because it's gone on so long, because it's really badly affected a lot of people's day-to-day lives. I don't think any party comes out of this with a particularly positive reputation. I do think it damages the government's reputation because they're perceived as not, taking a lead role, not standing in. But then on the union side of it, I don't think the unions. I think sympathy is running out for the unions. So the political impact, I think, is generally very negative.
I mean, Gavin, Matt was saying about what he saw the government and the Department of Transport as having been very impotent in dealing with this. Do you think that they've taken a knock here, and particularly Chris Grayling has taken a big reputational knock here?
Not especially. He seems to have kept himself out of the limelight. I remember, 15 years ago, Stephen Byers got in trouble over certain aspects of transport policy and really seemed to be under the knuckle, under the cosh of the papers. But Grayling, every time I've seen him on the TV, he just comes out and he sort of emotes very heavily. He expresses extraordinary sympathy for the commuters who are affected, and then somewhere within that statement there's a phrase, my hands are tied, which effectively is the truth. This is a free country, we have labour laws, and we have a privatised railway system. There's very little margin for the government to get involved, short of revising the labour laws.
And in terms of, you've just said it, private railway, obviously there's the leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, has made it very public that he prefers a nationalised railway and he would like to go back to the nationalisation of the railway. Do you think that this is this an issue which is even going to impact on the public mood towards, what should be done here?
Which is a very interesting question, because obviously if you poll people, they talk very fondly about nationalising the railway system, and that seems to be something that is playing very well for Corbyn. However, the reasons the Tories privatised the railways in the 90s was because they had such fear of a sort of 70s, 80s situation whereby the entire nation could be held to ransom by various unions. And if you take what's happening on Southern and multiply it by a nationalised railway system, you really do have a problem.
So, Adam, you agree this isn't really going to be doing anything for Jeremy Corbyn's nationalisation of the railways, opinion?
Well, I think every poll I've ever seen on the issue indicates that the majority of the public supports nationalising the railways, but for the railways, although it's an issue that goes right to the heart of people in London at the moment and possibly in the north and Merseyside, if RMT don't sort out their dispute, it's not a vote swinger. It's not something you can take to the elections. You can't build your policy platform on it. So although Corbyn might be on the right side of the argument of the railways, it's a drop in the ocean, isn't it, when it comes to electoral politics and what persuades voters to vote how they do.
We'll just have to wait and see on Thursday what the result is. Are either of you Southern commuters?
No.
No, I'm not. So we're none of us.
My heart goes out to them though every day.
All right, we're going to have to leave that there, but thank you very much for coming in, Adam and Gavin.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for another week. Don't forget you can find videos, comment and much more on our Facebook page and on Twitter @TipTVPolitics. Parliament returns from recess on Monday. We'll be bringing you the latest news from Westminster and beyond. Until then, goodbye.